Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Pitzer. I am the CEO of a company called SafeMap and a company called RiskMap, two organizations that are focusing a lot on the topic of discussion today. I'm also the co-founder of the conference forum, probably better to say, called Safety on the Edge. And it was an idea that Malcolm Staves, the global VP of L'Oreal, and myself came up with about 2 years ago now. And we were going to start with a small little workshop, having some discussions and challenges with some close associates and colleagues. And as we started talking about it and started talking to other people, it just grew larger and larger and larger. And eventually, it led to the staging of Safety on the Edge in Berkeley, March, April this year. And it was such a wonderful event that we have decided to do it again and again and again. It's going to become a permanent event. Next year is going to be in Baltimore, 5 to 6 May. And one of the speakers that we had, and we had some wonderful speakers in Berkeley. One of the speakers we had is Rodney Rocha, who is also today's guest. Now, for those of you who don't know Rodney, I'm going to start that again. For those of you who don't know Rodney, he's a former NASA chief engineer who was at the center of one of the most important stories of our time, and that was the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster. And Rodney was one of the engineers who raised early concerns about the foam strike. You would remember that was the shuttle that came back into the Earth's atmosphere and exploded because of some damage to the heat shield. And he offers a very rare first-hand look at how critical technical warnings can be missed inside complex and high-pressure organizations. And what makes Rodney's perspective so powerful is that he just doesn't talk about engineering failures. He talks about people and culture and decisions, which all the drivers that sits behind that engineering failure. And he has seen firsthand how assumptions just become certainty in organizations, how dissent can quickly disappear. And to me, this is a very important statement. How good people can end up making catastrophic choices. And that is almost always, when you look back at the disaster, is like, these are good people. And yet they made these decisions that turned out to be wrong. But it wasn't wrong at the time. It only turned out to be wrong. And then there are lots of signals in the organization that the system doesn't allow, or rather encourage, people to speak up. And since leaving NASA, Rodney has spent time sharing his lessons with leaders and safety professionals around the world, helping organizations understand what really goes wrong before a disaster, or what it may take to prevent the next one. As I said, he was a keynote speaker at the Safety on the Edge last year, and again next year in Baltimore. We have invited a few speakers back from the first conference to come and join us again. And this is a conversation today about courage and curiosity and what it means to listen when the stakes are high. So, Rodney, welcome to the Safety on the Edge talk today with me. Any quick word you want to say from that introduction? Did I get it right?
Yes, I think you got 99% of it very well. Thank you for inviting me. One thing I always like to point out is I was among several asking for extra data or images of the Shuttle Columbia. I list them in presentations I do, but I was perhaps the most vocal, I'll just say that, right, and whose emails were put into the newspapers.
Absolutely understood, and thank you for that recognition. It's not always a single person that has concerns. It's something that sits deep in the organization, and not always surfacing. But I think one can almost say, like we say with people who serve their countries, thank you for your service, because if you were not vocal, who knows what could have happened again and again after that. But we're going to have a discussion today about, I mean, there's the foam strike, there's all the stuff that happened in the disaster and other disasters too. But what we're going to talk today about is leadership, risk and risk perceptions, and speaking the truth, about potential failures in an organization, speaking the truth. So if I can start, Rodney, just that you've told the Columbia story many times. And when you step back now, what is most misunderstood? The most misunderstood lesson that people can take from Columbia, especially when for those who think they already know the case of Columbia. Is there something in Columbia that you think may have been underestimated or misunderstood?
Yes, I think there are a few things that I personally sometimes hear when people question me about the Columbia accident and the mission scenario behind it is uh, it was catastrophic loss of the vehicle and crew. And sometimes people ask this, why wasn't the situation handled like Apollo 13? We've seen the movies and we've seen other movies about early Apollo. It's why the inaction and um, why didn't the whole world get alerted to the possible grave danger that may have been posed to the crew? And the other part of that is, even when they know the outcome of what happened with Columbia and some of the bad decisions made at NASA high levels, I thought NASA had their best people on this. And if you just presented things logically and concisely, the good things would happen, the proper things would happen, the proper action and attention. Those couple of things is what I think I hear people they're surprised with, with that.
Yeah, yeah. NASA is an organization that is almost, an example of how the human being can operate at the edge. It is. Space exploration has to be the most risky endeavor that we engage in, and yet we do this actually very, very safely compared to the risk, if I could put it like that. Now, there are other organizations like this, mining, my background, and I'll talk a little bit about it later on, healthcare and aviation. Do you think that the issues that were driving decisions in NASA is also typical of other high-risk organizations like aviation and mining and so on?
I don't have experience in a career outside of NASA and its aerospace projects, but when I do read about some of the accidents and sometimes catastrophes in other fields like mining and aviation, I do see parallels. I do see echoes of what I and others experience. Management decisions that downplayed certain things, or at times I detect that there's a willful effort to distract from the issue and say, force it to, can someone just give us rationale to keep going? And I've seen that. I call it, and others have called it, confirmation bias. I need people, I'm pretending I'm a manager in some of those fields, and some of my engineers or scientists or people are telling me, we've got to slow down and investigate this anomaly or whatever. I think what managers are tempted to do is, yes, but I'm under pressure to get this product out or to make this delivery on time. We're behind. I need people to tell me it's okay. Unfortunately, those come forward too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. One of the things that I've given a lot of thought to is how we trace back what went wrong in the organization before the disaster. And there's almost a simplistic focus on the decisions that people make and how the decisions are wrong. I'm wondering if we are not looking deep enough into why the decisions went wrong and not just the decisions. And to me, this is the difference between, oh, that's the decision that they made, this is how it's wrong, and things went wrong. But people make sense of a situation in that moment in time. It makes logical sense for the organization to go that way. Do we understand this whole issue of sense making, or the failure in making the right sense, if I could put it like that? Is that a contributing factor that you saw happening?
I'm trying to relate it to the experience I have. I'm not too familiar with the terms you're using, but I'd like to point out there's two major organizations that get involved with once a flight is underway and before it's launched and the design process, and then we have a launch. The project management, like Space Shuttle project management, they're working with mission operations, flight operations. Engineering is the other major organization. That's the part that I was in before I retired. We're the technical authority. That's what the term is used. We should look at the technical goodness. Did we meet standards? Are we calculating metrics correctly? Also, if we have concerns about an overload or overheating or going beyond the bounds of something, our engineering management is supposed to defend what we say so that we can, if we coordinate it correctly, bring it up to mission control and to the project managers like Space Shuttle Management or whatever it is, Space Station Management or whatever comes in the future. It's coordinated as a technical story or technical questions and concerns and issues. It doesn't have to be proven, but we'd like to discuss these and push back and get more information. What happened at NASA, and maybe it happens in other organizations, is the engineering vast organization abandoned this, just left us hanging out to dry. They wouldn't even have meetings about our concerns. These emails that got flown around and the arguments I got, heated arguments with people, harsh, strongly worded, I want to say strongly worded memos that I wrote and others wrote about how concerned. I'm still mystified to this day. Why didn't engineering managers who were CC'd on this, they all read this stuff, why didn't they say, time out, stop this yelling and confusion and this arguing and big, people look like they're very upset here. Let's have a meeting. Let's go to the engineering director and stop all this talk. It's too free for all. It's confusing. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's have a meeting. That did not happen. That still mystifies me to this day. It's as if my engineering organization said, well, we're no longer in charge. The shuttle program is, and that's one of the consequences of the privatization process that was underway. The shuttle fleet and shuttle program were under a privatization process to hand it over to contractors for day-to-day operation like an airliner. A lot of us did not agree with that, and maybe that's what sunk into engineering managers. Well, it looks like it's happening. Space Shuttle Management makes all the decisions. We're hands off. Of course, engineers like me did not like that story, and we didn't feel that way.
Right. You use the word, we did not feel that way. And what I want a little bit of an exploring here is this, how the engineer's mind work in terms of quantitative risk analysis methodologies. You're an engineer, and there's a lot of engineers around. But then there's this feeling, this intuition almost. And I want to play you a little video clip of you. And it's a video clip that I have used many, many times in my work. And I want to I just want to prepare it here, and I will play it.
Okay. That almost sounds like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now,
Yes.
I had the honor in one of the documentaries where he mentions my name. I've never met him, but I said, "Oh, he got to mention my name."
All right. So this is where you and I met actually for the first time. I was invited to speak at the back in the saddle conference of NASA. This was just before COVID. I'm not sure if you can remember this day. And you and I met afterwards, and
Yeah,
you took me to a Chinese restaurant. And there, you and I both much younger, and we had a lovely chat about this. But here's the video clip that I want to share with you that I'm using in my work.
Rodney Rocha was the division chief engineer for the Columbia flight. After seeing the video, he and other engineers had wanted NASA to obtain additional images to check the shuttle for damage.
We have ground-based telescopes, and we meaning the military does, and satellites up there. I'm aware that we used some of that in the early shuttle flights in the 80s. Some of that was used and was classified. So that's why in my email request I said, let's ask, and I actually said, let's beg for outside agency assistance. And I explained why. We're highly uncertain about this problem. There's too many possibilities here. Some of them are very bad.
That to me is a very interesting comment that you made there. That you said there are too many possibilities here, and some of them are not. Some of them are bad, very not very good. Um, was it intuition, or did you have more quantitative concerns or quantitative analysis of your concerns?
I'm not going to say intuition. Intuition to me is experience based, where I start developing worldviews or beliefs about my work or the projects I'm in or whatever that are based. I'm not just imagining things. I'm actually experience based. But intuition is flawed. That's a word used by one of the shuttle managers saying for that was the excuse for denying images. My intuition says we had no grade problem. That's what that manager said.
Right.
Now, engineers, we know that had worked in depth with the development of the space shuttle, but also the space station, any aerospace vehicle that has to operate in very complex environments, high heating, loads, vibration, electromagnetic effects, and all that. These are all combined in a way into a vehicle that must survive combinations of all of these. We know that we're designed to a razor's edge on margin on aerospace vehicles. We've got to save weight. We cannot make it too heavy, like put more metal in there, like a bridge or something, or a building. We can't swap out materials at the last minute. We've got to make it work. So we know that if one deviates from the flight trajectory or the operational conditions just slightly, sometimes that can lead to failure of the material or failure of the structure or some kind of failure, not necessarily catastrophic, but we're always on the edge of that. So when something gets out of the ordinary, like we see on video, like Columbia foam 500 miles an hour relative speed hitting the wing, and we see a debris cloud on the video, something is out of configuration. It poses many questions. What are we seeing? We don't seem to see any hole yet, or damage yet, or its extent, or is it nothing? Is it very minor? We don't know. We do know. One of my examples is if we were designing a bird's egg, a chicken egg. It's an exquisite design, but it's just a thin shell. It permeates gas, osmosis. The mother bird can sit on it. But if you break the egg, you've ruined the configuration. If you just slightly crack it or put a hole in it, it may not survive very long with a slight crack. Now the structural integrity is greatly altered. Even the mother bird may break it. So, and it's hard to repair an egg, cracked egg, to restore it. So I'm using a crude metaphor there, but it's kind of like that. We're operating on the edge. Any deviations or anomalies always pose questions to engineers.
So when at what point, I mean, there's a lot of deviations, there's a lot of anomalies that come. So it's almost like a whole flow of information in front of you. How do you go into a decision or a sense of this is over the edge, or this can take us over the edge? How do you get to that kind of decision in your own mind?
Well, sometimes there's the proper and very widespread action and proper action by managers, and the all of NASA's expertise and laboratories get involved, like Apollo 13. What makes that different from Columbia? Well, I'm asked that a lot. The crew felt the shudder and vibration. They look out their window and they can see the particles and frozen water droplets and the scintillation off the sun. They can see it. All the data is showing up. The exploded tank and the loss of pressure and other anomalies are on the data screens. Columbia is different because all we had was a flight day 2 blurry video subject to endless interpretation and speculation. So there's no definite answer there revealed in that unenhanced video. Later, there would be other video coming forward, but we didn't have that at the time. We didn't have that. Simulations would come later. I think that's what makes it different, is the evidence is not very good, whether it's okay or not. So as engineers, we like to be conservative and say, let's say, what if it is bad? How bad? And extra data might bring us back to goodness. It may reveal, oh, it's just a scrape. We'll do more analysis, more testing, and we'll bring it back. We think we can come back. But if you have no data whatsoever, then we're blind and we have to pose the tough questions. Let's do more. We need more data. And the shuttle didn't register such data like an impact hit. It wasn't sensitive enough. The sensors in the wing or deviations to the trajectory, those were just minuscule. It's like a mosquito biting an elephant. So we needed more.
Yeah, and this raises another interesting concept for me in failure. If we often talk, and there's people who write books about the concept of drift, that we gradually drift towards a failure point, and that we have deterioration of controls and deterioration of structural integrity and things like that. I have a theory, if lack of a better word, a theory that we're not necessarily drifting gradually to a failure, but that we suddenly collapse at a point. And that, like the eggshell that you use as an example, the eggshell does not necessarily gradually crack and then fail. It collapses because of some sort of structural issue that happens. And I'm wondering if we are lulled into a sense of, oh, let's look for evidence of drift in the organization and not looking for that point where things can suddenly collapse. Do you see the value in that?
Yeah, yes, you're using the word drift. I would say we have incremental disempowerment of watchdogs and oversight and insight. That's what I have seen. I've seen it very markedly in the Space Shuttle program. I served that program for 30 years. I'm aware of it going on in ISS, also the International Space Station. But shuttle is my best example because my whole career was immersed in it. Even though we complained in the old days, 1970s, 80s, 90s, that, oh, we're underfunded, the shuttle program never has enough money. in retrospect, we had plenty of money to do the right thing. And the right things were, we had technical integration, experts that were experienced, and I led some of those panels, the shuttle loads and dynamics panel, and learned from my predecessors. We had availability to lots of data being taken. The shuttle that has the wings, we call it an orbiter, had data recorders on it from flight day one, from the first shuttle launch, Shuttle Transportation System Mission number 1, Columbia, and then all the rest that followed, had some level of data measurement and recording. It was used by engineers on the ground to keep assessing the performance. How close are we to red lines and margins? Are we comfortable or not? Also, they revealed anomalies. We had anomalies every flight. Some of them were minor, and a lot of them were never resolved. Some of them were environmental, like the environment is doing a Mach number or aero phenomenon or something, but other times it was hardware. Some we solved and some we did not. And we knew that we were handling a very fragile machine that needed constant watching with measurement and data. Eventually, toward the end of the shuttle program, those were dismantled because of cost. And what we get into the delusion or comfortable feeling, or managers do, is we've been running this a long, long time. Nothing really bad has happened yet. Yeah, we knew about Challenger. Yeah, we know we're over that, they would think. But we're running and running, and we've got this. They start wanting to wean away the oversight and insight and the assessment. Like, we need that labor and resource for something else, future programs. Fine. But I'm afraid of that. And after one accident like Columbia, they instituted extra safety independent organizations with a lot of empowerment. They had the ability to say, you got to stop. You've got to answer this. And NASA would go, yes, that new safety, we've got to do that. That went away. They got disempowered. Safety and mission assurance, yes, they do risk assessments, but they don't really have a lot of engineering power behind them. They don't have a big budget to do independent analyses. I saw that. So those things drain away and wane away. With the argument is, we don't need that anymore. We've been running pretty well. But that's where the danger starts lurking, is you stop looking, you stop measuring, we stop periodic inspections. The shuttle, that's the other key thing. Keep up the periodic inspections. You know, the airline industry record on that, where it can lead to bad things. Sometimes we're just not looking as carefully anymore. Yet the periodic inspections frequently reveal very unexpected results. And we had to stop flying in 2002 for months because of inspections of several things. So when those things go away incrementally, we're setting ourselves up for the unknown and the things that are creeping up. And there's an old adage here that if you don't look under the rock, you won't see the bugs.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion there. And it's almost the difference between the way that management in any organization look at it, different from the safety professional, the engineers, is that management is driven by evidence of success. We are successful. And the longer we are successful, the greater the confidence, a false sense of robustness almost. Now, just with this in mind, I'd like to explore this a bit more, but I'm going to show you another video clip of a simulation of Roger Boisjoly in NASA associated with the Challenger disaster, and I'd like you to comment on that.
Say, Roger, you got a minute? Come on over. I hear you've had a couple of new thoughts.
Yes, I do. I wrote a memo to Bob Lund about it.
Well, what's the meat of it? Would you mind telling us?
Since Flight 17, we know something we didn't know before. The primary O-ring can fail completely. If that ever happens in one of the major sections of the rocket, it's a jump ball as to whether the joint holds or fails. If it fails, there'll be a catastrophe of the highest order. Loss of human life. The shuttle, the launch pad, all of it.
Roger, you're keyed up about the O-ring problem because O-rings is what you work on. It's what you see every day. Now, we got to fix this O-ring problem. There's no question about that. But, Roger, the shuttle has flown 19 times, and it's come back 19 times. Our job isn't to run around like Chicken Little hollering the sky is falling. It's to keep that shuttle flying.
I haven't seen that movie in decades. That was that Challenger movie made for TV. And
Yes, yes.
my favorite parts are the technical parts like that and that berating that Mr. Boisjolet and Mr. Allen, I can't remember, the leader of the Morton Thiokol team. Yeah.
So I know this is Hollywood style, but in that last sentence there, when you said the shuttle has flown 19 times and 19 times it's come back, this is my evidence for success.
Yeah.
And one could almost sense that is where a lot of management decision making is driven by, is the sense of success, which is what
Yeah.
they get paid for. Your comments on that?
A series of successes, even with anomalies sprinkled in. In the shuttle program, they were called, they were put into category bins called in family and out of family. It was used a lot. There would sometimes be things happening to shuttle tiles, for example, scraping or cracking or some kind of whatever it is. But the thermal protection system comes to mind here. So if you make it back, it was put into the in-family category. There would be an assessment visually and whatever else they did in the lab. Well, that didn't look that bad. There's capability here. Now, it wasn't capability based on necessarily metrics or measurement. It looks like it has capability and enough left. It didn't burn all the way through. It didn't cause cascade failure and so on. Other anomalies that we see. Out of family means that in that cluster group, they tend to be clustered in family. You fly and fly and fly and nothing bad happens. And they're clustered together statistically. And then one day you get one that's on the edge and it's called out of family. Management sometimes would say, okay, now we got to look at this further. Sometimes they would and sometimes they wouldn't. They'd still say, well, do we still have capability? But it would be more of a qualitative judgment. The real way to do it is to simulate that analytically or in test. As in testing, you try to get replica materials and try to match as many parameters, apply the heat load or the environment, and see what you get. And maybe you'll verify you're okay, or sometimes you'll find that there's cascade failure or something. Here's my point. In family, out of family has no metrics associated other than counting, bean counting your successes. How many are at the edge? They're not the metrics of how close are we to material failure, structural failure, resonance, altered behavior. Maybe it's temperatures are causing a material to go weaker. It doesn't reveal that. You're just binning it, throwing in these bins called in family, out of family. So the more you have in that bin of success, well, yeah, it can lead to false confidence that we're okay, even though you really don't know how close you were to utter failure.
You were mentioning, and I want to come back to this whole concept of how close or how far away we are from failure in organizations. But you used earlier on, you used the term goodness. And I've heard that in this video of Challenger as well. It's away from goodness. Is that the same concept that you used as in family, out of family?
Goodness I borrowed because I've heard that used at work. I didn't come up with that term. Goodness, I think, to me implies that we have adequate margin for this. And margins are positive numbers. We're even, well, non-negative numbers in structural capabilities, in unique maybe to the stress world and structural capabilities. We're allowed to fly at zero margin. um, as long as it's not negative. However, that I agree with that. As long as we know the environments exquisitely, we know them very well, and we know the material properties very well. We know that everything's got integrity. We can get away with that. I think that's okay. The problem is you make a structural modification or a material change, or you alter the environment. You got to redo all this all over again to see what the ripple effects are. So, and sometimes we think we know the margins, but there's something buried that was unassessed. So we've got to be very, very careful with that. That's why I call for not just analysis. We need that data measurement. We need to metrically measure how well it's doing, the performance of the vehicle, and check it against predicted behavior. You don't have to do that every time. That's very expensive. Do spot checks and do the inspections. So it's kind of a triad. How did it perform? Measure, look for anomalies, do inspections. So there's other things I could add to there too, independent assessment and so on. But
and this may be difficult for you to comment on, but in the world that you lived and worked in, you mentioned earlier on, no, we had enough money. We were able to, we should have been able to make things happen with the funds that we had. And when you look at an organization that is not structured like NASA or aviation, Boeing and these organizations, they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on items, small items to be structurally correct, on training of people. There's a lot of money around. Now, in organizations not like that, like the organizations that I come from and work with, say mining, their margins of revenue, of cost, is so prohibitive that when we say, well, you got to test, you got to analyze, you got to do the metrics, you got to do the measurements, they're often prohibited or limited in their capability to measure. And they have to work with intuition, and they have to work with making sense of an understanding of situations without data. That to me is another level of challenge. Have you experienced that? How do you see that?
Well, when we had major modifications to the shuttle, we had to do that. It was called performance enhancement. It took years and years and tens of millions of dollars. If we hadn't done that, we would not have been able to launch the components of the International Space Station. The shuttle had no capability at the time. It had to be pushed and enhanced to a new capability. So the money came forward because a case was made to Congress. The president and administrations that call the space station vital to the nation and to the world. We have international partners. They made the case. I don't know about private companies that answer to shareholders or private interest. It might be different. In NASA, there's a political interest. The elected officials want a piece of the pie and money in their own states. They'll gladly support space endeavors and things as long as it's in their state. The science they may not understand, but they want a piece of this action and pie and all that, and the employment that it causes in their states. I wish it were not so that way, but it is that way, and that's the way NASA is today. But I think we know the environments in aerospace vehicles, the way they're tested, scale models, full scale test programs. We get physicists and scientists involved in material science, all this stuff. It's very complex and expensive, of course. I do wonder about mining. Do we really know the Earth's structure that well, at a micro level, where if you dig here, that's not going to collapse, or it will collapse over here, there's a void here. I don't know. I'm ignorant. I'm pleading ignorant of that. I don't know. I do know that in the aerospace industry, at least in the design phase and the test validation phase before first launch, there's a hell of a lot of testing. And we sometimes argue there should be more, and we just couldn't afford more, but we have what we have. I don't know if that goes on with other kinds of industries. I'm not aware of that. But in the aerospace industry, we have to do that. Now, there's one thing that I don't like happens at NASA, and I think in the aircraft industry. Once the design phase is over, we've got the design, we've got the operations, we've done the training of the astronauts. Once they're aloft, if things happen up there, like, okay, foam hit the wing or whatever, something happened, it's a new world. Operations is now in charge. That's not necessarily the same as engineering. They want to know, how can we get out of this with the least amount of testing and engineering, partly because we're running out of time. The clock is ticking. We don't have that much air and food and lifetime or capability. We need an answer now. Now, if it's that serious, we'll pull out the stops. That was Apollo 13. Doesn't matter what it costs. But if it's not that dramatic, sometimes they want the easier answer. Somebody tell us it's okay. Well, even if I did it on the back of an envelope, okay, well, I'll take that. Or making analogies like, well, 5 missions back, we had that. Okay, maybe that's valid, or sometimes it isn't. That's why you have to have a lot of people with independent eyes and ears listening to that same story, and not rely like, I found my person that says it's okay, so that's the way we're going. No. Spread it out. Democratic process. Solicit. Bring them all in.
Yeah, that's I mean the whole coming back to the operations world, where things go wrong, but when it goes wrong, or if it goes wrong, it may have been the result of deeply embedded issues in the organization that at the design stage already was embedded in that deficiency, if you could call it that. And it's high up in the upstream in the organization. Like, for instance, when you talk about mining, the structural integrity of when we dig deep shafts, like shafts are now going, 2 miles into the Earth's crust. And there is a great science there, rock mechanics, it's called. They understand as far as possible a great deal of it. But what they experience so much is the actions and behaviors of people at the front end, where they have, and they don't necessarily fully understand the risks they're dealing with. They just, they dumped into the situation and there they operate. And I've had an experience with a mining company where they had this focus on the elimination of fatalities. And they contracted me and a few others to support them in that. And what we did is we went to mine sites, and it was like over 40 mine sites around the world, huge company. And we talked to the frontline employees to understand risk through their eyes. What do they see? And what don't they see? And what risk mistakes they make, like underestimation and so on. But we talked with between 12 and 16,000 people in that time. It's over 2.5 years. And what came forth to me was there is much, much more exposure to failures than what the eye meets. We discovered over 2,500 potential fatal accidents sitting there right under the surface of the organization. And yet, the organization did not have any failures and failures in that time. And companies asked me to establish a system for them where they could have their frontline employees engaged in discovering of risk. And I want to show you an example of what happened in this organization in terms of this, to give you just your comments on that. Now, this is the concept of the far miss. And this is a marine mining company, so they don't even dig into the Earth's crust. They mine off the seabed, and this is off the coast of Africa. And what the background to this is the system that we installed is called the Safe Sentry system. So the frontline employees go out with other employees and they do a 1 hour or 2 hour walkabout and they identify risk. Now just look at what one of the Safe Sentries discovered. Down there at the bottom that's the Atlantic Ocean. On that pipe is a scuff mark. And the person questioned intuitively, why do people stand there? Now, if you look at the situation, those are security cameras. That's the edge of the ship. It's a massive ship. And these cameras have got to be cleaned every night because cold water, fog in the cameras. And so what the Safe Sentry discovered was this. The security guard that comes at night to clean the cameras is a short person. He stands on that downpipe, water pipe, and he leans over the side of the ship. And the ship is moving in the ocean. And if he falls over, they would not know how this happened. All they would know the next day is a security guard is missing. Had it not been for this observation. And this is the what I call the far miss. That is part of the design that happened in the ship way back. Engineers would think, oh, we put the security cameras there and it's fine. But it's these anomalies that we find in risk perception, in behaviors at the front end. From an engineer's perspective, how do you foresee all of these possibilities? That guy done that for years and years, never fallen over, but one day it happens. How do you put a thinking process in place in an organization to look at these kind of possibilities?
Well, I think I know this. I participated in design reviews. They had different names like preliminary design review, and they had definitions for those. Then the final one was this certification design review. The PDR would have like, well, we only have 10 to 20% of the drawings and data available, but we're proceeding on. There would be a lot of reviews. A lot of engineers would be invited from various organizations. And then later you get to the CDR, the certification design review. 90% of the design is blah, 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 ready to go. But there would be invitations sent out all over NASA, those that were actually legitimately had some interest in the systems. Maybe not the whole thing, but pieces, and sometimes it was an integrated system. We were allowed to submit comments and also what we thought were exceptions or CRs, change reviews and things. They all had to be reviewed. They all had to be gathered up, and there was a committee that would study them and they would disposition them. Sometimes they throw them out like, well, no, this is not justified. We argued about that sometimes. But there were vast multitudes that were allowed to look at the designs as it progressed along. And I saw a lot of very thorough ones and very good ones happen, and I had to defend some of them, and other people sometimes championed mine and they championed others. What I saw over the years is that got more compartmentalized. Fewer and fewer people were invited to the CRs. That's what I call the process of filtration and making the numbers smaller and smaller and smaller, and also trusting the contractor more, the vendors. We've done our own internal reviews. They would say, we're okay. There was a dissolution of the engineering, the systems engineering and integration, where we look at all the ripple effects and interconnected effects. NASA said, oh, in Constellation, we had too much of that in the Constellation program that was created by President Bush, later canceled by another president. They got rid of integration too. They said, they went to this philosophy, every project will integrate themselves. And a lot of us laughed. Yeah, that doesn't work because that's not in the contract scope. Every contractor has a limited scope of what they're to deliver. If you tell them, well, what about the thing you're joined to, or if you change this, how does it affect that other company? They said, well, it's not my problem. Yeah. And other people called it, if engineers were at meetings, well, what about the effect of this and this? And they said, well, what organization are you from? And well, I'm in rocket propulsion. He said, "You're asking about a structure? Hey, stay in your lane, bro." That was discouraged. Yet there was no viable integration going on. Now, managers would say, "Oh, we had integration." Yeah, but they integrated budgets, they integrated deliveries, they integrated products that were deliverable products. They had to do this amount of data, this analysis, all that. Is that on time? But independent technical experts looking at posing more questions and more questions, that was, well, if not discarded, it evaporated over the years. And I think that's true today. There would be a lot of disagreement with managers today and people that would disagree with me, but I have colleagues that are retired and they fully agree with me with the situation.
Yeah. I want to go back to the very first statement you made, even before we were on air, I think, when you said to me that you were not the only voice at the time. You were just the loudest voice. Now, the whole issue of psychological safety is very well constructed today, and it's much more evident in organizations than it was before, in most organizations. But there is still almost not a requirement, there's almost still a need for people to have moral courage, despite the fact that we may be eliciting more and more input from people. And is that a difference that, well, I think that's what you had at the time, is that courage to speak up. Roger Bourgeois, the courage to speak up. And not everybody can do it. Apart from the fact that, we are encouraged to speak up. But when anybody speaks up, you're thinking about all the consequences of you speaking up. There's lots of, things that can ripple out from what you do. How does one build or create or encourage that courage in an organization?
I get asked that, and I see positive signs in some of the early career engineers in my department where I retired, but I encourage them to speak up, and you got to tell the truth. And they would nod their head, "Oh yeah, we have to." My supervisors at the time, they were, I don't know if it was any influence of mine, but they spoke up during the Boeing Starliner events, like where the thrusters were not firing reliably and all that. And we sent a crewed mission up to the ISS, and that's still ongoing. But my organization, that wasn't me. My organization was really happy to see this pushback on Boeing against something else, not having the right math models in place. We did independent analysis for them. We saw there was reluctance for Boeing to do it. It said, we think we're done. There's nothing wrong. But NASA, my organization, said, "No, we're going to do it. We need this data. We're going to do it." They actually did it. And that was in recent times. It was a success story. But we did Boeing's job. Not me, but my colleagues did, with right type of management. But we had tigers in the old days. Our subsystem managers, their vast experience, they wouldn't have tolerated the lack of inaction like during the Columbia mission. They would have broken the doors down, because they were allowed to do that in those early shuttle days. They could go up to a program manager, knock on the door, "We need to talk to you now." They wouldn't, sometimes they'd shout at each other. Now the protocol, it's a stifling protocol. That's a phrase that comes out of the Columbia last chapter of the investigation report. There's all these hierarchies and boards, and you have to get permission to talk to this person. You can't call companies directly. It's a stifling filtration and damming up of information now, and it still exists today. We have chief engineers and technical authorities that every project has. the chief engineers come from engineering, but a white paper, there was a colleague of mine named Mark Glorioso. He wrote a white paper, he gave it to the administrator of NASA, associate administrator. It was years ago. He said, chief engineers and technical authority that are very high ranking, they're too close to the program. All they hear about is cost and schedule woes. They don't solicit enough. What are you worried about? And concerns from ordinary engineers. They don't have regular meetings. Most of them don't. And in that white paper, it was said what you said earlier. A lot of times we depend on heroic action, but it comes out of nowhere, and the person was never trained for it. The hero erupts. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And the courage to speak up needs to be modeled. And my department had modeling. There were colleagues that they have to be willing to suffer, and like I did, and they did too. Threats, bullying. You better not do that, or I'm going to call human resources and do this to you, or we're going to put you in another job. All these threats. They weren't removed because some of them had such specialized knowledge. There was no replacement for them. And they were modeling for others. They mentored other engineers. So I believe in the mentoring program, showing by example. Sometimes I've asked, it was one podcast, aren't you glad of the legacy of how you changed NASA management? And I said, I didn't change NASA management. That's a superhuman job. I can't do that. All I can do is at a local level and have a ripple affect my colleagues, my mentorees, and hope and pray that they do the right thing. And I've seen it do it. They do the right thing. So, or can they be afraid? Sure. Wouldn't it be better if management recognized this more and said, we will not tolerate a hostile environment. We won't tolerate bullying or all that. Well, that existed after the Columbia accident, but it fades away. Managers were super careful how they spoke. Some of them had coaches to pull them out of the room. I'm serious. NASA hired coaches to say, time out, come out here. You're talking too rough. Come out in the hallway with me. They'd have a big talking to. Then they could go back in. I don't know what they got, a spanking or what, before they got back into the room. All that's gone. All that's gone. Right. And that you could submit suggestion boxes. Did the meeting go right? Tell us how we can improve. Oh, I don't see that anymore. I didn't see it. It's back to hierarchy, filtration, protocol. We're setting ourselves up again. And of course, I'm not there anymore, but I'm watching. And all I can say is we individuals can't fix organizations. I think that's a superhuman job, but we can model best behavior, the right behavior, and train others.
Yeah, I like that statement that you said there. The courage to speak up has to be modeled. And if you're sitting in a room of CEOs of high performance, high stakes organizations right now, and maybe that's the last question I have for you in our podcast is, apart from you have to model speaking up, what else would you warn them about or inform them about with your experience? What would you say to them?
I would ask managers to provide a welcoming democratic process to regularly bring forward issues and concerns or comments that they have for improvement. They can create avenues and processes to do that. Yes, there can be too much. We have people coming out of nowhere and you don't know when to stop it. There's just too many people that are worried about things. You need a process to disposition these things. There were such things. There were suggestion programs. There was continuous improvement. There was total quality management. They got dismantled. Over time, they became they weren't paid attention to. The NASA Engineering Safety Center was so powerful after the Columbia accident. But their budget was cut. They were told to quit harassing the projects, for independent assessment, quit being so demanding. And they were told that I have a metaphor. their fangs were removed. That's what happened. And some of my colleagues that were there and were retired, they agree with me. Their voices had to be lower, and they're allowed to run seminars and teach classes and protect their discipline and keep it pure, volunteer and represent NASA here and there, but don't challenge like you were tigers in the old days and challenge projects on safety. They know what they're doing, and you you can do that only if you're invited. I found that insulting. You can do independent assessment if you're invited to. Like, wow, well, it finally happened. I called it exponential decay. It happened. Hypersensitivity after a terrible accident, then implement all this stuff. Everybody's careful and with their speech, tiptoe, don't talk rough and all that, don't bully. And then one day it goes back. So
that to me is probably one of the most important processes, I think, today in this complex world where we're going into higher and higher risks of complexity, is what you just said there, is we have to have a system to challenge the systems. If we don't have a system, people are not feeling that they have the right, the authority to come in. And then they have to have courage. And many people don't. So to me, that's probably one of the greatest learnings from this podcast from you.
And permission to speak and go through all the channels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rodney, I think that was just an amazing chat with you. I think we're coming to the end. Your voice is starting to struggle with your cold.
Thank you. I want to tell you, I did talk with Roger Boisjoli himself. We had a phone call. I called him. We had a very good conversation. I regret never having called him again. And, he passed away a few years ago, and never having met him. Alan McDonald was that's the person I was trying to think of. He spoke up too with Roger Boisjoli. I got to see him on a Zoom call, and I said, I admire your courage and all that. And we knew about each other's stories. So, and of course, they're very well done in that Netflix story. But I did talk to Roger, and he told me, Rodney, just do one thing. Always protect that factor of safety, structural factor of safety. Never give it up. And which is a sacred factor for us, 1.4 for aerospace structures. Don't negotiate away. Don't give it. I said, Roger, I won't. I pledge I won't.
What a wonderful story. Mm-hmm. And I so hope that there's young people who's going to look at this podcast, CEOs of companies going to look at this podcast, and that they will be inspired by what you just said and by you. Never give up, and make sure that we model the right and the courage for people to speak.
Right. And when I say never give up, it's never give up on the crew. It's not just don't give up and work harder and all that and persist. What is the product? Crew safety, bringing them back home, doing our best to go all out to bring them back home safely. It may not work. We don't know anything is guaranteed. We don't know it'll work, but you never give up on the crew.
Wonderful. That is such a great ending. Rodney, I really want to thank you for this great opportunity to chat with you. And I think this is going to be quite inspirational to many. Thank you again. And we hope to see you, we know you're going to be back at Safety on the Edge in Baltimore. And if I can just ask, and I'll put this on the screen, I ask people to go to www.safetyontheedge, one word, safetyontheedge.com, and register there. And you will see Rodney again talking in much more depth again at our conference. Rodney, thank you very much, and I hope everything goes well. Merry Christmas and a great new year for you.
Peace, goodwill toward everybody, and prosperity to you and everybody.
Thank you.